Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about WandaVision episode 5. It's called On, a very special episode. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. So it's funny. So after last week, which felt like a big episode, because last week had the whole, okay, now we're in the real world, we're getting to know Monica, we're getting to know all this context, the snaps brought up a lot, all these things. And we get this wider context for what's going on. Get into this week, it's like, okay, this one by its nature can't feel as like much of a game changer as last week, because we did the big shift, and as the episode's going on, it's kind of doing what you expect. You have the next sitcom part of it, which is an 80s style sitcom, and they did a very good job of matching that to the point where they even added some what do you call it, color bleed for the image. It's not super extreme, but it is kind of there. And really noticeable, because you're watching it in like 4K, you're watching it in Dolby Vision, but then it still has this kind of video kind of quality they've added to it. So you've got that going on, but you're also cutting to the outside, because now we've established Monica, we've established Agent Way, we've established Darcy outside, and they're kind of reacting to things and trying to figure things out at the same time. And that's kind of what we went into this week expecting, is these two sides going side by side. And there's some big moments in the episode before we even get to the ending. There's a whole scene where Wanda comes out in her, real outfit and, looking like, Wanda from the movies, and gets very threatening to the agents. And we'll get to all that. But no one's going to talk about any of that, really, for the next week. What everyone's going to be talking about is the ending, where things get kind of extreme, and this is legitimately one of the best, what the hell, I can't believe they're doing this kind of, I don't want to say twist, it's not a twist per se, but a reveal. And because they were hyping up during the week that, or at least I think it was Olsen herself was hyping up during the week. There's going to be some guest stars you're not expecting, and one of them's on the level of what the Mandalorian did at the end of its second season. Now, I didn't watch season 2 of Mandalorian. I know what they did in terms of a guest star, quote unquote. I won't spoil it just in case anyone cares, but and part of me was thinking, okay, you're overhyping maybe a little bit, because that was a big deal for a lot of reasons, reasons. That I don't think even having Robert Downey Jr. show up in the middle of an episode, well, it'd be very surprising and cool that they got someone that big from the movies to appear, and that may still happen. Not Robert Downey specifically. I mean, if anything, maybe Captain Marvel could make a small appearance. Like, it would make some sense based on certainly a line of dialogue in this episode, and the fact that one of the characters is directly related to her movie. I wouldn't. If not, certainly they're teasing how Monica feels about Captain Marvel, given her reaction when her name's mentioned, for whenever she does eventually meet her again, and maybe Captain Marvel 2 or whatever, wherever it may be. So we have this. But we have this moment where they've mentioned, Quicksilver a couple times, Pietro. And he was mentioned, it was cool when they first brought him up, and in this episode, he's kind of brought up naturally because the kids, the two boys, they age up to 5, and then there's a joke later on where they age up to 10, when they're told they have to be 10 to keep a puppy, so they age up to 10 again. And they're asking about brothers, and like, do you have a brother, Mom? And she's like, yeah, I do. And she's, kind of... And then at the end of the episode, the doorbell goes, and this is right as Vision's kind of basically realised most of what's going on. Not everything, but he knows enough that he's debating with Wanda. We'll get into all that. I'll go back and talk about all the rest of the episode, but we have to talk about Quicksilver. We have to talk about not just Quicksilver, because obviously the door goes, she opens it, and we see the back of the head, and it's it's the silver kind of hair with the streak and all that, and it's like, oh, it's Quicksilver. They actually brought Quicksilver back. That's cool, and that's a big deal. Even just bringing back Quicksilver from Age of Ultron would be a fairly big deal for the show, to bring an actor like that back who's only appeared in the one movie and is important to Wanda's arc and their character. But for them to reveal that it's the X-Men version of Quicksilver from the Fox X-Men movies, that is legitimately surprising. And there was only ever going to be a first time they could do this. Because anytime it happens now, it'll still be neat if it's in the right context, if it works for what the story's doing, if Deadpool shows up, if anyone else from the movie shows up, whatever. But there was only going to be a first time where something for the Fox X-Men movies was brought into the MCU, and that first time was pulled out of a complete surprise, randomly in the middle of a season of a Disney Plus show, which probably, if nothing else, does a lot to sell the reason to, if you're an MCU fan, to make sure you keep up with the shows in Disney Plus. Because the thought of having to go until the end of the season and binge it then and not have this spoiled, there's no way you can make it. I'll be surprised if it's easy to get through to Saturday from when it premieres on Friday without finding out somehow that this has happened. Because this was insane. I kind of sat up and went, holy shit, because I mean, this is unthinkable. They've brought back her character, her brother character, who died in Age of Ultron, but they brought in the alternate actor who was in the Fox X-Men movies. The Fox X-Men movies, which also had rights to Quicksilver, and MCU got to keep Scarlet Witch, got to keep got to keep Wanda, and I mean, it's such a unique circumstance, first of all, just because we had the two versions almost simultaneously in the two different movie universes. Now, obviously, they said before this show aired, way back when they announced all this stuff, that this was going to be fairly important, this show, to the next Doctor Strange, which notably is called the Multiverse of Madness, or something to that effect. So, clearly, this is, I imagine, part of that. He is from a different universe. He is from another version of the Marvel universe. He's from the Fox version of it. So I think that plays into that, if nothing else. It kind of has to. And obviously there's the joke where it cuts to Darcy and says, she recast Pietro, which is a really funny line. So everything about this makes this feel very unique. The idea of, and we know Spider-Man 3 is going to apparently have a lot of the old Spider-Man stuff coming in. And that was cool to hear that they're bringing back a lot of the villains and the other Spider-Man and all the rest of it. But I think this is more exciting as a first time. Because we know so much about that, and so much of that's been rumoured and teased, and it's like we expect all these things from that movie. One of the perks of TV, streaming or otherwise, versus a movie, is that it's actually, I mean, I know a lot of this stuff did leak in the last week or so, but I didn't look at any of the leaks. I have no idea what else it's leaked as well, but I know a lot of stuff did leak in the last week or so, but relative to movies, keeping stuff a surprise for TV does seem to be a much easier task, and stuff like the end of Mandalorian Season 2, I think wasn't spoiled in advance. Not really. So it's unfortunate that some stuff from this did leak a little bit early, but for the most part, it's easier to stay away from it and not know these things, where I can give you a list of actors I'm expecting to see in Spider-Man 3, just based on Twitter constantly telling me, oh, so-and-so rumored to be back for Spider-Man 3, so-and-so rumored to be there. Whereas this has relatively been kept much under wraps. So this was a much more shocking, holy shit moment, that not only did they bring someone in from an alternate universe, the fact that he's actively replaced the previous version, which in and of itself is kind of this weird meta joke. And then on top of that, whatever it might mean for her processing her feelings, and we'll get into it, and blah, blah, blah. So, huge ending. Excited to see the interaction with him next week. Obviously, he has this strong accent for the sitcom-y side of things, but and Wanda has her accent back a little bit when she's talking, when she's threatening the agents, the sword agents, because when they send in a drone, but notably a drone from the 80s, because one of the things they discover, that Monica discovers, is that Monica's not making people hallucinate to see the wardrobe and the props and all these things. They're all there. What she's doing is essentially transmuting items into the appropriate items. So how she discovers this is that her 70s outfit that she had inside the show, inside the town, is actually technically made of Kevlar, because she had a Kevlar vest on when she went in, so her pants are bulletproof. So they send in an 80s drone so it can make it in without being changed, and that works. And this is what prompts Wanda to come out, mainly because the head honcho of S.W.O.R.D. has put weapons on it, which Monica did not know about. Monica is still very much of the belief that even if Wanda's behind all of this, that she's not doing it intentionally, and that she is not she's not intentionally trying to be a terrorist or have victims. Director of S.W.O.R.D. Disagrees with that, because she did go and steal Vision's body. We get a confirmation on that, so that is Vision's corpse, and they're walking around. Regardless of anything else, it is really his body. which is fascinating because that was a question I had last week. Is it literally his body that's walking around? But of course, this episode I think goes great lengths to really tease that there is another force at work here, that it's not all her. Not only does Wanda at the end, when she's confronted by Vision, say that she's not controlling the whole town, that she's not making sure everyone's walking their dogs or going to their dentist appointments. She doesn't seem to have an idea why there's no other children, or she's not noticed that, where Vision has. And notably, one of the best scenes of the episode, which is when Vision's at work and Norm, the guy who works across them, they're getting computers for the first time. There's a lot of computer jokes. This is the thing. It's funny that Connor bailed out and said, "This is what the show is." Because even after episode 4, and I told him, roughly what it was, or he knew what it was. He says, "Nah, but it's still going to go back to being sitcom, and it's still what it is." It's funny because I don't think this episode really does go back to exactly what it was. It does continue the sitcom things, but they're much more smaller chunks. Because more often than not, we're having Vision notice things. We're having more moments where characters are saying or do things that are out of character. Agnes, of course, the neighbor, has a moment early in the episode where, because Vision doesn't react very well to her saying she wants to, help put the babies to sleep, she turns around, breaks character, and says to Wanda, "Do you want me to take that from the top?" As if she's talking to a director. And everyone kind of acts weird about it, and it's a thing. But notably, Norm, when Vision takes away the mind control, because he does it because the computer has some stuff from Sword on it, and he takes that away. So then he sort of clears Norm's mind, so Norm becomes himself, whoever the real person is, and he starts panicking, and he's very scared because his mind is being controlled, and he's aware that his mind is not his most of the time, and he's panicking. He wants to find a phone to contact his family. It's a very real scene. It's a really good little moment. And Vision, just to calm him down, puts it back on. He puts the mind control back on, not to be cruel, but just because to keep everything going so he can go deal with it. But notably, when Norm is saying it's all her, he never says Wanda's name. He says it's all her. And I think that is a tease that the neighbor is the force that's really set a lot of this up. Wanda clearly, because she comes out and threatens, Sword and says, stay away, I'll give you one warning, makes all the guns point at him. Gets mad at Monica when she tries to talk to her and calm her down. She's clearly enjoying, and maybe that's not the right word, it's a bit too light, but she clearly is buying into and wants to believe in this marriage that she has with Vision. She wants this reality to be her own. But certainly I think the more sinister side to this, and the idea that everyone's being controlled, that is something that I don't think she did to begin with. And even Vision doesn't think that either. Vision sort of says, I don't think you started this intentionally, but... And I think he even says, only you have recently become aware. Or one of the other characters says that. Is that she wasn't necessarily aware how fake everything was at first, but obviously as time has went on, she has become aware. And she's actually resetting things as time goes on. Which almost makes me think that the early episodes... The cuts, the edits that Darcy's pointing out, where there's cuts being things happening, there's things being cropped out. It's almost as if that Wanda might still be the one who's kind of those are her edits, and she's only choosing to remember certain things after the moments. So the broadcasts, if you will, are Wanda's version of the events, because even she's blanking out on a lot of the weirder moments that we're not supposed to be seeing. And obviously, I think that's obviously broken by now, and we're seeing the weird stuff, but that's her perfect version of things. But yeah, I think the neighbor Agnes, because I noted that they didn't discover who she was last week, and then this week, all this hints that there's she's responsible, and it's you're supposed to think it's Wanda, but I do think that we're teasing that up. Not and again, Agnes could be anyone. The villains that the big Marvel fans are suspecting from the comics, could be anyone in disguise, shape shifting, whatever. Because clearly they have the powers to manipulate and illusionate's not a word. But you know what I mean? They have all these powers. Whether it's straight up telepathy, physical transformation, whatever it may be, clearly the entity behind this has those powers. So, but no, Vision confronts her at the end and says, "This is not right. Norm has a family and wants to get back to, and he can't because of you." To the point where they almost come to blows, and they're floating in the air, and he yells out that he can't remember anything from before everything. And he doesn't believe that she's not in control. And she gets very frustrated because he doesn't believe her. And that's when the doorbell goes. It's right at the height of all this. Almost as if this third party is trying to... Because there's a running thing that Agnes keeps bringing them what they need. Bringing them help with the babies getting to sleep. Brings them a doghouse right after they've got a dog. And Vision notes that. And then here, there's a distraction. There's a big family distraction to take away from this very real dispute that they're having. So it feels like the third party is trying to keep their mind away from questioning what's going on here. So all that stuff is super fascinating, super interesting. And then, of course, on the outside, we have the other side of things, which is, I mentioned some of it, Monica figuring out some of the rules about going inside. And a couple of little tidbits here that are important, I would guess, is that she has a friend that she's going to call when they're theorizing about how to get inside, and it's going to have to be like this weight and all these types of metal and stuff to block out the Wanda powers and all that. She calls her like her astrophysics friend or something like that. It seemed like a tease. No idea who she's referring to. Maybe it's someone we recognize. Maybe it's a tease for a future new character that's going to be important later. But very intentional. I mentioned her reacting because they're debating that Wanda's super powerful and she's the only one that I think it's Wu who says she's the only one who could have taken on Thanos on his own and almost did. Monica says that, and then Wu's the one who responds with, well, no, I'd argue Captain Marvel could have stood a chance. And Monica's reaction is very telling. My guess would be that, Captain Marvel disappeared from her childhood and has been gone for decades. And she's actually feeling very miffed that she's kind of back in the picture and showed up for a couple of things, in Endgame, and hasn't been to visit or call. That'd be my guess, just based on no other information. Maybe we'll find out there's more to it than that. But I'm guessing she just feels pissed that she's kind of been abandoned from childhood and it's kind of a sore spot. So she moves the subject on quite quickly. There's some other good beats here, Darcy interacting with them, try to call it the Hex, because of all the hexagon shapes. Everyone thinking the director of Sword's a dick, because he keeps just basically trying to paint Wanda as just a straight up terrorist, whereas Wu's like, she did, turn over a new leaf and join the Avengers and all that, but he wants to focus on the negative, and him and Darcy kind of, bond a little bit over him being a dick. Notably, he questions repeatedly the director if she has a code name. Does she have like a silly code name like the others? And that kind of calls to question that we've never actually addressed her as Scarlet Witch in the show or in the MCU at all. Which I think this might be the setup for calling her that by the end of the season. Like, I don't know what the context is going to be, but I largely suspect that by the end of this show, she will be given the moniker of Scarlet Witch in some way. So, which is cool. It's neat. It's neat for her to get this kind of focus. It's neat for her backstory to matter again. Even bringing up her brother before, and then obviously again in a big way in this episode, is like, oh, this is something that felt like the movies had left behind because it was only important in that one. So this stuff coming back, this is why it's good to have these individual miniseries that are focusing on these characters who aren't getting movies. And I'm really enjoying this. This is the middle episode, this is 5 of 9, and this one was a little bit longer. And I guess it kind of makes sense because it's kind of got a little bit of both the outside and the inside of the bubble to deal with, so that's fine. It's not super long. It's like 40 minutes with the 7 minutes of credits. But the fact that this is like 33, 34 minutes before the credits is actually the longest it's been so far. So, rejoice, I guess. But no, a lot of advancement. Everything with Vision, realizing where he is and being kind of horrified at what this is doing to these innocent people. Obviously, the ending's a huge game-changing kind of what the hell moment. One of the best I think I think it's one of the best because, okay, it's Quicksilver, yeah, that's what we're building up to, and that would be a big enough moment in the context of the show, but it became this bigger thing where it was bigger than the show almost, that they'd done this. And I think this show might be remembered now for doing this particular crazy thing, and bringing in the X-Men Quicksilver, the Evan Peters, is that what I say his name is? I'm looking at the cast list on IMDb. Imagine looking at the cast list before watching this episode and seeing his name there. Absolute madness. What is this photo of him on IMDb? It looks kind of weird. He's got like blonde hair and it's all short. He looks like Martin Sheen. Not Martin Sheen. Martin Freeman. The one from The Office. Martin Freeman. Not Martin Sheen. I always mix their names up for some reason. Yeah, he's got like a really good photo. I don't know what that's from. But yes, so yes, the other kick-ass actor showed up, not the one from Age of Ultron. and all the stuff with the kids. I mean, I think it's probably important from a character perspective just to mention some of the on the nose stuff with Wanda talking about death in this episode, because the two boys, they find this dog. There's some comedy about the dog, but the dog ultimately dies. Notably in Agnes's bushes, might I add. Again, tease that she's evil, but they're dealing with the death of the dog, and Wanda has to jump in and say, "No, don't age up again. I know you want to run from this feeling. Trust me, I know, but you can." And basically gives them a speech about death, and it's notable that she's like everything she's doing, everything she's giving into, and accepting this world or creating at least part of it is refusing to deal with death and refusing to move on from death herself. So, thematically, obviously, all that stuff ties into it to what's going on. If anything, it might even be a little on the nose, but there is something kind of intriguing about her learning lessons from her fake children, and then they know out in the outside world that these kids they've not been taken from someone. That these are not like everyone else in the town where they've been manipulated, and that's maybe the one thing that maybe suggests that part of it's Wanda. That because if this evil entity is doing all this, like why would they care about not taking children unless there's something specific with them relating to children? But it almost feels like a oh, it's too cruel to do this to children, so I won't take any kids kind of thing. That's what it feels like, at least at a glance, but we'll see if there's more to it than that. But there is something interesting. Like, exactly what are they then? In that case, are they part of like Wanda's psyche? Are they there to kind of teach her lessons? And because it feels like she was kind of teaching herself a lesson almost by talking to them about death in this episode. So very fascinating to see where they're going, and they are really setting her up as being one of the most powerful characters in the MCU, which she technically was. And the only example we ever really got of it was really her fighting Thanos and being the only one who could kind of stand her ground a little bit in Infinity War. But they've not really sold us completely on that idea yet, so it's kind of nice that we're kind of getting there. And she is going to be one of the most powerful characters, and these shows are a way to again give these other characters a spotlight that arguably aren't going to feel any less important than the characters who are getting movies per se. I think at this point, we'll see how that is. But I'm way more into Wanda as a character than I am Doctor Strange, for example. But I'm more excited for Doctor Strange 2 now, just because it's going to tie into some of this stuff, and she's going to be there, and some of this plot's going to be continued in some fashion there. So it feels like there's a giant game plan once again with these Marvel properties, which is nice. And I won't like every part of it, but I am enjoying WandaVision quite a bit. So, yeah. There you go. Episode 5. We're in the middle point of the season. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. And just one thing. They're doing a really good job of the setting and the time period. Although I will say technically this should have still been in 4x3. The 80s were still very much a 4x3 decade in TV. And even the 90s as well. I mean, some widescreen was starting to dip into things right at the end of the 90s, but that's really a 2000s thing. But whatever, it's not a big deal. But I guess they were just sick. They'd already done 4x3 in colour in the last episode, so I guess they just wanted to do something to advance it, even though it's technically too far for the time period. But it's still different from the outside world, because the outside world's in 235 to 1, and then it's just 16:9 inside the bubble this episode. I laugh. Someone shared a thing with me from Twitter this week about the aspect ratios, and I love to talk about aspect ratios if you're familiar with my content. But someone sort of like doing an okay job of analyzing what was going on. Like someone on Twitter said, "Oh, has anyone noticed that when we're inside the sitcom, it's like an old TV, like an old square TV, but when we're outside, it's like the Marvel like format." And I don't want to completely shit on it, because the person is at least noticing that there's a difference and what the difference means, and that's kind of commendable and should be encouraged. That said, referring to 2.35 to 1 as the Marvel format cracks me up, given that it's been the standard movie ratio for decades and decades, and has been very popular in movie making since... I mean, it was introduced very early on. I mean, it was definitely around in like the 50s, but I mean, certainly the 70s onwards, so many movies use that ratio. It was a little bit neutered in the 80s, because I think directors wanted to shoot for 185, which is closer to 16:9. because when they were cropping it for 4:3 TV, you were losing less of the image, so it was maybe a kind of like a middle ground. But it's just funny to me. 235 is the Marvel format. Which is funny as well because not all the Marvel movies are actually in 235. The first Avengers is in 185, and I think one of the Ant-Man movies might have been 185 as well. Maybe the first Ant-Man movie. There was definitely another one. There was definitely at least a second movie in the MCU that was not 235. But anyway, I realize this is boring to most people. Let me know what you think of WandaVision episode 5 in the comments. Like and subscribe. Liking and subscribing is super important. Helps us out and helps share the content around. You can also support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and keep all the content coming. Otherwise, catch us on Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?